Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. I'm Ben and I bought my first KLR 650 7 years ago now. This is my second KLR. This is a Gen 3. It's a 2022 model. And back when I was looking at my first Gen 2 KLR, I noticed that there are not too many people out there that buy one of these bikes and just turn the key, throw a leg over, and go. Everybody seems to do some amount of modifications to the bike to sort of make it fit the type of riding that they want to do. And there are a lot of people out there that are firm believers in the fact that you should not be riding one of these bikes without the Doohickey swapped out for the Eagle Mic version and without the Thermo-bob mod done to it. There's also a few other things on the Gen 2s like the subframe bolts that might possibly snap, leaving the seat sort of hanging off the back of the bike. And of course on all of the generations, the drain plug sticks down about that much too far, so you don't want to take the bike off-road without replacing that with a low-profile one. Of course, the plastic skid plate is useless, and you definitely don't want to hit any rocks or logs or anything with that. And the list goes on, and by this time, you've decided that you're just going to buy something else and not worry about all of the stuff that this bike requires to make it bulletproof. So in today's video, I'm just going to go through everything that I've done to the bike real quick, then we'll hop on it and I'll kind of talk you through why I've done the mods that I've done, and of course we will go over that infamous Doohickey and the Thermo-bob, and I'll tell you why I have and have not done those mods. So I've got D-Sport tires on here, front and rear. Would definitely not recommend those. I do have a KX450 fender on here that cuts down on the highway wobble a little bit. There's a video specifically on that if you guys want to check that out. We've got the Tusk crash bars on the front here with some auxiliary lights wired into the high beam. We've got some Tusk brackets here that mount these lights absolutely perfectly. Again, videos on all that stuff. There'll be just a big playlist actually down in the description. Windshield riser here that puts the windshield up in a much better position for off-road riding and really for on-road riding too. I've got a GPS mounted to that. That's a Nuvi 60LM that is wired into my 3D Cycle Parts 12-volt outlet here. I've got heated Tusk hand grips on here. That's the three-way switch there. Those are just under these rubberized grips here, which are also aftermarket. And that stuff's all mounted on the Tusk Chub bar. This is the KTM High Bend, which is a really pretty good combination along with the rise that the 7 Ace to 1-1 Ace Tusk conversion risers provide you with. I've got Barkbuster handguards on here. We've got the Tusk large tank bag. I've also got the Camel ADV one-finger clutch kit on here. On the crash bars here, I've also got the lowers. We still have the stock skid plate, but that will be getting switched out eventually. I do have the Thermo-bob mod done on this bike. I did not do that on my Gen 2. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. On this bike, I've got the JNS non-damped lowering brackets, or maybe these are just rear set. I had the lowering brackets on the other bike. Maybe these are lowered, not rear set. I don't remember. On those brackets though, I've got the Tusk pegs, which I absolutely love. In front of that, we've got the Tusk shifter, which is definitely necessary if you're gonna wear decent riding boots. You need that extra space in here, and I've only got a size 10 boot. I've also got grommets around the air valves on both the front and rear wheel. Basically, this is just gonna keep water and dirt and other debris out of the inside of your rim, so it can't mess up your tube. And of course, we've got the all-important low-profile drain plug down there. On the back here, we've got the Tusk pannier racks and their soft Olympus bags. Or no, wait, these are the Pilots. These are the Pilot bags. The Olympus ones are the ones that I would have gone with had I known that these did not come with a quick disconnect, and I know you can add that on, but it's a pain in the butt. On the top here, just zip tied down to the top rack, I've got the largest Tusk dry duffel. I've also got a Lex pipe hiding back here with the biggest tip available and the special Lex spark arrestor in there. And inside of the airbox, I do have a uni air filter, and the airbox is de-snorkeled as well. And then of course, we've got the Tusk D-Sport to round things out on the rear. All right, let's gear it up, throw a leg over this thing, and we'll talk KLR conspiracy theories.
So in order for any mod to be viable, it has to have two things going for it: demand and supply. So somebody has to ride this bike and think, it would be better if it had this, or if it was like this. And then of course, a company has to be able to supply that at a price that will satisfy riders. And I think the KLR 650 has so many parts out there available for it for a couple different reasons. And I don't think any of them really are that this is a bad motorcycle or that, you know, the factory screwed up. I mean, some people will argue that that's the case. I don't really think so. I think you could definitely buy one of these and not do a single thing to it other than change the oil if you don't plan on doing any intense off-road riding, and if you only plan on doing a little bit of kind of high-speed on-road riding. But as you start to do either of those things more and more, you start to want things like crash bars, you want things like a windshield that's a little higher up, you want a GPS to get you places and to find trails. And of course, if you're going to ride trails, you're really going to need some tires that are going to actually be able to keep up with both the trails and the weight of the bike. I think a lot of people make that mistake of putting a tire that's not really capable of handling how much this bike weighs on the type of trail that they want to ride, so they end up thinking that the bike can't really perform very well, or that they're just not a good enough rider to make it do what they need it to, and then they end up either just not riding it off-road or selling it for something lighter. And that's definitely not a bad option. I honestly do not think this is a good bike to start out on it if you don't have any off-road experience. I think you need to start somewhere small and light and easy to ride off-road. Now, obviously this bike has been out for a long time, so people have just had the time to spend on making parts for it, and it's made sense to keep making more parts because Kawasaki really, until this last third update, hasn't made all that many changes, and really a lot of the parts, even from a Gen 2, will still fit a Gen 3. Not all, but some of them, and kind of the same thing between the Gen 1 and the Gen 2. This bike just has so many people out there riding it that everybody wants something a little bit different, and the bike in itself really is kind of a blank canvas. Now, obviously, people can paint on whatever they want for the type of riding they want to do. You're probably wondering a little bit more about that Thermo-bob that I've got on this bike, or the Doohickey, and we will get there, I promise. But I think one thing you need to understand is that a lot of the people that are looking at these bikes and buying these bikes plan on buying it to turn it into what they want it to do. Very few people, I think, buy one of these and just ride it as is. Not, like I said, not that you can't or not that you shouldn't, but I think a lot of people are drawn to these bikes because of this aftermarket support. So I think a lot of people get a little bit freaked out about that. They think that if I buy this bike, I need to do all this to make it a good motorcycle. That is absolutely not the case. This is a good motorcycle as is. It will ride off-road, it will ride on-road, but it won't do either of those really, really well. It doesn't have the protection from the factory to ride off-road, and I know there are people out there that swear that it's better to just have the bike be lighter and not put crash bars on. I do not agree with that, unless you want some pulled muscles or to do nothing but worry about dropping the bike off-road, unless you really just don't care about your plastics or your radiator or your levers or anything like that. I think crash bars are a necessary, I don't want to say evil, but a necessary thing to put on a bike this big. Well, that's a dead end, so we're not going that way. For any of you guys that have been around from the beginning, first of all, thank you. But second of all, you guys kind of remember probably when I first got my bike, I'm pretty sure it was already burning oil, about a quart every couple thousand miles if I was riding on the highway. But I never did the Thermo-bob on it. Didn't really see the need to, since it was already burning oil. I also didn't do the Doohickey on that bike, and that bike had 24,000 miles on it by the time I sold it. I bought it when it had like just a little bit over 9,000, and that bike honestly ran pretty darn good, right up until the point that somebody smashed into it with a minivan and pushed the swing arm over about 6 inches. Now, would that bike have made it to 30,000 without something going wrong with the Doohickey? And if you guys are unfamiliar with the Doohickey, in a big thumper motor like this, a single cylinder motor where that big piston is going up and down, that can cause a lot of vibration. So essentially what the engineers did was put something else inside of the motor to counteract that or counterbalance it. So essentially you've got a chain that's running around one part of the motor leading to the other part that is counteracting that. It's basically just a weight in there that sort of evens out the movement of that big old hunk of aluminum in there going up and down. And what can happen is the tensioning system for that chain, because just like any chain, it can eventually start to stretch, or will eventually start to stretch. And I guess I don't know if I want to use the word theory, but the reasoning behind people switching to the Eagle Mike Doohickey is that stock system that does the tensioning supposedly doesn't really do enough tensioning. The spring can be weak, the spring can break. I think honestly a lot of the problem, or a lot of the reason that people have problems with it, is because they don't realize that you're actually supposed to manually adjust that, or I guess loosen a bolt so it can automatically adjust itself, I guess however you want to look at it, because we can just hop off and show you. There is a fastener, oh boy, we're gonna have to go real low, underneath this little rubber cap here that basically keeps that Doohickey in place. And if you guys have ever seen that, it's a little piece of metal that sort of can swing on that little fastener there. Basically just has kind of a slot that it can adjust itself once you loosen that fastener up. And that spring in there that I was talking about is basically just supposed to kind of pull that thing into the position that it needs to be in. Once you loosen that up, then you tighten it back up, and you should be good to go. Now, I know that there are definitely people out there that have probably adjusted that as you're supposed to and still had problems. But the thing is, any motorcycle, any machine that is put together, I guess even by a robot, even if it's not put together by a person, anything like this with moving parts has the ability to have issues. Any one or maybe a handful of that type of machine can have issues. Obviously, if the ratio is lots of issues compared to total, then, well, you know, that's where you end up with recalls. And essentially the only time something gets recalled is when a company realizes that they're going to have more problems and that they're going to be forking out more money because they don't fix a problem, versus if they were to actually fix the problem, the cost that it would take to fix the problem on, you know, however many units are out there. The thing is, they're only going to have to pay for those things, those problems, if it happens within the warranty window. Now, you can buy extended warranties and that sort of thing, but most KLRs, from my research, and of course do your own, don't trust me, I'm not a mechanic, this is just stuff that I picked up online, could be bad information, who knows, but it seems like most bikes are not going to have a problem with the Doohickey. Most, not all, but most are not going to have a problem until they're over the 20,000 mile mark. Now, it may be in my head, but it did seem like my KLR did start to make maybe a little bit more noise and a little bit more vibration towards the end of its life. And of course, the end of its life was not because of anything that went wrong with the motor. It was the guy in the minivan that needed a cheeseburger real quick. Obviously, I have no way of knowing, you know, how long that bike would have went like that. As far as the Thermo-bob mod goes, like I said, it just didn't really make sense for me to do it anymore. I didn't think, because of the cost of it. And I don't remember what the Thermo-bob 3 mod on here costs. It costs a bit more because you get the little temperature readout. I did the math at one point and realized that unless I rode this bike for 30,000 miles and did end up burning oil in the next year or two, I would never save money by doing this. You don't really do that type of mod, or you shouldn't do that type of mod to try to save money. It's going to save you the hassle of having to dump oil in it every other ride. Now, some people might think, whatever, you know, I'll just dump it in, who cares? But you think about how much time you spend doing that. You think about how much dirt gets dropped in there if you're adding it on the trail and your cap is all full of mud. It's not really that great for the environment. It just sort of adds up to the point where I went, I think I'm just going to stick the money into it and then just hopefully not have to worry about burning oil. And so far, so good. People will say that Thermo-bob does absolutely nothing for oil burning. I kind of tend to disagree. And if you guys are unfamiliar with the Thermo-bob mod and what it does, or the problem that it supposedly solves, where do we want to go here? There are two major parts to a cooling system. You've got something that has to pump the coolant through the motor, and then you've got the radiator that basically sits kind of in front of the bike and lets cold air run through the fins and the tubes that antifreeze is going through, so it cools that down, and then the water pump pumps it back through. And then in between the inside of the motor and that radiator, you have something called a thermostat, which is a circular little device about like that big that essentially closes off that system, closes off the liquid inside of the motor from the liquid outside of the motor. The reason that you want a thermostat in there is just because the bike needs to get up to an operating temperature, or a temperature that is going to be efficient and is going to be somewhat steady. And without the Thermo-bob mod, essentially what the bike will do is kind of hover around a temperature that's not really ideal. And again, I'm not a motorcycle mechanic, but it was actually the very first thing that I noticed about my Gen 2. It ran super cold. That bike did have a temperature gauge on it. It was just a kind of an analog dial that just had a C and an H for hot and cold, or cold and hot. And that needle was pretty much buried all the time. And I thought, man, that seems weird, you know, that, I mean, I guess it's cool that it runs cool, but like, is that really right? Is this gauge working? I didn't quite get it. And then as I kind of got into the community, I learned a little bit more about it and realized that basically the bike just kind of runs cool, almost too cool in most situations. Like where I'm riding right now, it would be running, I would think, pretty cool. Now, once you get into stop and go traffic, once you get into trails where you're really working the bike hard, meaning the motor is really doing a lot of work to kind of keep the bike moving, you're maybe spinning the tire, you know, fighting through dirt or sand or whatever, but you're not getting a lot of air across that radiator. At that point in time, then the bike finally heats up, thermostat pops open, and all of that antifreeze that has been sitting in your radiator, literally just sitting there, not being circulated at all, that antifreeze is more or less going to be outdoor air temperature. So on a day like today where it's 70 degrees, you're dumping 70-degree liquid directly on top of that piston in there. And I don't know if you guys have ever tried to dump cold water on something hot, or dumped it on hot glass, or put a pan in the sink when it was too hot. Generally, things don't like to be drastically heated up or drastically cooled down. Now, if you only do that a couple times, every once in a while you get stop and go traffic, every once in a while you go off-road, it's probably not going to be a big deal. But if you're somebody like me that does a lot of off-road riding, hard, slow off-road riding, I take this bike on single track. This bike does a lot of heat cycling, or would do a lot of heat cycling if it still had that stock cooling setup. So essentially, you stay in the yard, Fido. Hey, buddy! So essentially what the Thermo-bob mod does is basically puts a very small bypass in between those two systems, so you always have a little bit of antifreeze circulating through that radiator. And so essentially it's just kind of keeping everything at about the same temperature, so you don't have that, I guess, shock load, sort of, if you will. Now, I cannot tell you for certain that if you do not do that mod, that it will eventually burn oil, but the thinking behind it is every time you shock load that, you're starting to kind of warp things, making the piston rings in there not perfectly fit the cylinder. And essentially around your piston you've got rings that sort of keep the combustion on one side and the oil on the other. Now, maybe on the Gen 2s you might save yourself some money since the kits are a little bit cheaper, or even on the Gen 1, but on this bike it was done out of, I guess, almost laziness. I just did not want to have to keep dumping oil into this bike like I had been with my Gen 2. I had a Tenere 700 in between the two, and it was just so nice to not have to worry about checking the oil level and dumping the oil in. So honestly, I'm glad I did it, and really all the mods that I did to this bike I am really pretty happy with. I do consider on and off doing suspension on here. I personally have never done suspension, and I don't really want to have to pay anybody to do it, but I also don't really want to put the time in to learn how to do it. But I think I probably should, because honestly, off-road, what it really is holding my bike back now is how kind of bouncy it is. I mean, it really does okay for road riding. It's a very comfortable road riding bike. It does pretty darn good on gravel roads, just as is, especially with some decent tires and some crash protection. You can do quite a bit with this bike, but once you get into the more bumpy trails and the sort of single track riding, or just even like woods riding where there's lots of bumps, it can be kind of sloppy. There's just too much weight for the way that this thing is sprung and damped. And if you're somebody that's bigger, you may very well have to put a bigger spring on the back. You might have to put some spacers inside of the forks on the front, or revalve it, or put different weight oil in. There's a whole rabbit hole that you can go down with all that sort of stuff. And a lot of people say that putting different springs on this bike really will help the handling, and I think I kind of mentioned that a little bit early with the tires that I've got on here. They sort of make the highway wobble worse. And if you don't know what the highway wobble is, I guess in my opinion, any bike can kind of get a little bit of a wobble going at high speeds. Now, I think the reason that this bike is so bad about it, or has kind of an issue in my opinion, is really just because it is so heavy. The forks are so long, and they're not really well, they've never been updated. They're an 80s design, and they're a little sloppy. Now, I do actually have a fork brace that I plan on sticking on this bike. I've really got to get that video filmed and made. But if you're not going to do a whole lot of off-roading, if you're not going to do a whole lot of highway riding, you're probably not really going to notice it, unless you've had a bike that is, similar and performs way better. Obviously, then you might be wishing for a little bit more. And honestly, that's one of the biggest things that I've noticed between the Tenere 700 and this bike, is just how well that bike is set up as far as the suspension goes, both for on and off riding. It just handles everything so much better. But that bike is a lot more expensive. And honestly, I think a lot of KLR riders either come at the bike or kind of grow into the bike, realizing that it's kind of fun to do this stuff. It's fun to stick different things on here and kind of see what you can get out of it, either on or off road. It's sort of like a puzzle. That is a weird looking house to see out here. That must be new. That's super cool. My wife keeps talking about buying land and building a house, and I just don't want I don't want to put the time into trying to figure out what we all want, because I know no matter what I do, I'm going to dislike it. And that's honestly something that I guess I would think that I would run into with motorcycles, but I really don't. I don't know. Most of the time when I make mods, I'm always pretty happy with them. Not always, but for the most part. In this bike, honestly, I'm really pretty happy with. And I don't know. I don't know where it's going to end up. I guess we'll see. We'll see where the road and the trail take me, I guess. But for now, I'm honestly pretty happy with my KLR, and I think you could definitely buy one of these bikes and ride it just as is, as long as you're not going to put more than 20,000 miles on it. Don't let the issues scare you. Maybe buy one of these, see how you feel about it, ride it a bit. But like I said before, it's definitely not a bike for everybody. It's big, it's slow, it's heavy, but man, do I love it. So if you guys are interested in buying one of these things and you're looking at one, let me know down in the comment section what type you're looking at, what year, and that sort of thing. And then we can kind of have a discussion down there about the different mods, if you guys are for or against either the two big mods or any of the other ones that I've talked about today. Let us know down in the comments what you think. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care, stay safe, stay swanky, but most importantly, get out, enjoy this beautiful world any chance you get, whether that's on a KLR or not. Just get out here and enjoy it. We only have so many days on this planet, and you definitely need to get out here and enjoy them while you got them. So we'll see you next time. I'm gonna enjoy the rest of my ride, and I guess go home and edit this so I can post it tomorrow, because I can never seem to stay ahead on making videos. And I do this. I can't believe that camera made it this whole time. Still recording.